understand what has happened. Now we see what's going on. What do we need to do? What's the plan? So we started doing research, and we came to find out that people like Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and many others, they already had the plan. We just didn't know about it. And so this is what this conference is all about, is understanding what the plan is, to understand what has happened to us so we know what it is we need to do as a people. So I brought in Dr. Kumar Johnson to deal with education and what's happened to our children, especially the black males.
Look at how we as a people actually play into the stereotypes that are being used to justify our over-incarceration. See, it would be hard to over-incarcerate a people if they did not project themselves as criminals. It would be hard to over-incarcerate a people if they did not project themselves into the roles that the American social order wants them to be in. In other words, brothers and sisters, we're unique as a people because we're the only group in American history that actually helped kill their own image. We helped kill it on television. We helped kill it on the radio. We helped kill it on the CD, the DVD, the magazine, the newspaper. We're responsible for our own degradation of image.
I brought in Tim Wise to deal with our white brothers and sisters, to help them understand cognitive dissonance and white privilege and how that came about.
Because see, in 1964, the year that Civil Rights Act was passed, 2 out of 3 people locked up in this country were white, and 1/3 were people of color. By 1994, 30 years later, and still today, 21 years after that, 2 out of 3 folks now locked up are black and brown, 1/3 are white. There are only 2 possible ways that you can explain that shift. The shifting from 2 out of 3 being white in jail and prison to 2 out of 3 being black and brown in prison over the course of roughly a half-century. Only 2 possible theories. Number 1, sometime around 1965, we white folk woke up from a deep-ass criminal slumber. And we were like, damn, we have been robbing and raping and killing and stealing, and we have got to stop. This is out of control, people. We need to just stop all this craziness and foolishness and fly right, you know. And then black folk, hearing the news that we were done with crime, black folk were like, well, now hell, if they're not going to do it, then shit, I guess we'll just do it. That would be theory number 1. Feel free to put your money on that one if you really like that one. But I promise you, you know, don't let the sarcasm throw you, but you know, it's not accurate. Any criminologist will tell you that, in fact, the share of crime done by white folk or black folk as a share of all crime really didn't shift. The share of Latino crime as a percentage of all crime did go up, but that's just because the percentage of the Latino population went up. But actually, Latino crime rates in most categories, particularly violent crime categories, are not particularly high. In fact, they're not any higher than their share of the population in most states. So, in fact, that can't really account for it. So it wasn't that black and brown folks went nuts, white folks shaped up. It was that the resources of the justice system were deployed over here and not over here. And although that was mostly, it was not exclusively with regard to the war on drugs, but it was mostly so. And I'm going to put the war on drugs in quote marks because we know it's not really a war on drugs. We know this for a couple of reasons. Number 1, because if the war on drugs were about drugs, somebody else would be giving this damn talk to you. Right? Because if the war on drugs were about drugs, my ass would be in prison, and they don't let you Skype in the lecture from the joint. That's just normally not what they do. Right? So if this were about drugs, I would be doing hard time because I did all the same drugs, sold them, dealt them, did them, possessed them in rates that were far higher and with much more regularity than just about any person of color that I knew. I worked for 15 months in public housing in the city of New Orleans, in a public housing community that was virtually all black, all poor by definition, considered to be the worst public housing in America at the time. I don't even know who ranks that kind of thing, but apparently they voted on that shit. Yeah. And they were like, no, that's the worst one right there, that one, right there. So there I was working in that community. I saw fewer drugs there in 15 months than I saw on a typical Saturday night in my own dorm room, freshman year of college at Tulane University, uptown New Orleans. The cops didn't come into my room. Cops didn't come into my room.
And then we brought in Dr. Joy DeGruy, who dealt with post-traumatic slave syndrome. And it just wasn't something that's just with us. This is with everyone. And that's one of the things that we found out with her as well.
How I knew about their dissonance, right? I knew they would have experience in cognitive dissonance around it, because inevitably there would be someone that would say, even though it's in the syllabus, I say at the beginning of the class, they'll say, professor spending an inordinate amount of time talking about black people. Wish she would have spoke about other people. And I said, and so I say to them, I said, you know, here's what's interesting. 10 weeks about black people just seem like so much, too much. I have 4 degrees. I have a bachelor's in communication, a master's in social work, a master's in clinical psychology, a PhD in research, and guess how much of that was all white people? So I thought it should be okay for me to do a 10-week course. But it felt unnatural because that's kind of what's happened for us. You know, we've all been injured like this. Cognitive dissonance, those of us that are working in mental health or health, have heard about cognitive dissonance. And it's when you are actually holding contradictory ideas, beliefs, behaviors, attitudes simultaneously. So you're having these contradictions simultaneously inside your body. It's cognitive dissonance. So the biggest thing that America did, and it's an amazing thing, because America prides itself on this notion of democracy and freedom. It's what America prides itself on. Send us your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. These are the statements that, you know, we grew up with as people put their hand across the most important vital organ in their body and pledge allegiance. And the only problem is at the exact time that these things were being espoused, these assertions were made, at the exact same time, we know that American chattel slavery was alive and well, and genocide was being committed against Native people. So then you have to ask another fundamental question. How did people who saw themselves as intelligent, moral, civilized, and superior engage in behaviors that are the antithesis of that? In other words, how did these people engage in what is nothing less than barbarity? And how could you reconcile that, the dissonance that should show up? And here's what happens. If you have a group of people that have been oppressed, doesn't matter who the group is. It could be women, it could be people of color, you name the group. In order for people to consciously and deliberately subjugate and oppress those folks and not feel dissonance, is they have to first justify the behavior. So in order to justify the behavior, you then relabel the people, project, to fit your behavior towards them. So we have to understand that this notion of American chattel slavery evinced certain feelings of, you know, people had problems with it, but they had to put it out there in such a way that it seemed reasonable. It had to seem because you got to remember, if you're talking about the ratification of the 13th Amendment, you know, it's talking 1619 when they first hit Virginia. But prior to that, actually the Spaniards brought enslaved Africans, so we're really looking at 339 years. So for some, you had to have a whole lot of people complicit and feel comfortable about that behavior, right? So I love this statement, and this statement is from W.E.B. He says, but in the propaganda against the Negro since emancipation in this land, we face one of the most stupendous efforts the world ever saw to discredit human beings. An effort involving universities, history, science, social life, and religion. Which means, but it actually is more. I looked at more than that. I looked at science, politics, religion, education, medicine, media, and law. That's not exhaustive. It's just all I had time to look at. And so what we have to understand.
We also found out things about our own community here in Fort Lauderdale. And I found this out from the curator, Derek, at the Old Dillard Museum, Derek Davis. And this was something I found out in the piece that he did for the seminar. How many of you guys know about Mr. Hill, the black millionaire here in Fort Lauderdale? Wow. That's awesome. There was a black millionaire named Mr. Hill. In fact, there's a statue of him that's over in Fort Lauderdale. And the saddest thing is that I can't, you don't even know who he is for me to even tell you where it is for you to know who he is. But I want you to look him up. And this is one of the things that I found out. Mr. Hill, the black millionaire, Derek was talking to his accountant and found out that the city of Fort Lauderdale was in trouble. In fact, it was bankrupt. And Mr. Hill came along and bailed it out. He bailed out the city. They did not, and this is the accountant told Derek that this is when Mr. Hill's problems began. Because they had no idea how rich he was until he bailed the city out. A few months later, Mr. Hill was murdered and shot to death in his car. It's important for us, and I say that only because I was not aware of it. And even though I come from somewhere else, I can see those of you that are here, you don't even know it. And this is how deep this situation is, that we don't know who we are and what we've done as a people. We are a great people. We are a magnificent people. We are geniuses. Our children are geniuses.
Yes, ma'am.
And so again, this is the reason for this conference.
Only black folk. Even the Constitution was ratified in about 1789, and the first nationalization of immigration law was written in 1790. It stipulated very clearly that this is going to be a white nation. It's going to be a white nation. Only for white Europeans as a white nation. They excluded black folk. White, they didn't exclude everybody, they excluded black folk. And so black folk, you have to understand that you're unique in all these things. And then at that point they say, well, we're going to be a nation of immigrants. They put a zero quota on black folk. They didn't put a zero quota on Asians and Arabs and Hispanics and gays and midgets and humpbacks and lesbians. They put it on black folk. You're unique. You're the exception. So if I keep mentioning these exceptions, how in the world do you allow yourself to be put in a broad, ambiguous category called minorities and poor folk and people when you're totally different? Nobody on earth has been treated like you. Nobody's been treated like you. If nobody's been treated like you, just like the United States brags about being an exceptional nation, you are an exceptional nation within a nation.
Yes.
You are different. Why don't you stand up and demand and say, no, I'm going to put me in these categories. Don't call me a minority. I have not had those experiences. We've been treated different from everybody. And then later on they came up again. If they'd had black folk, they started the immigration laws. And the Europeans poured in. And they started getting land grants. For every white person. For every white person who owned a slave could get 640 acres of free land for every slave.
Come on now.
They didn't give any black folks 640 acres of slave for every slave. For head rights, they could pick up 1,000 acres of land. Just in the land rush of the 1880s. In the land rush of the 1880s with the Oklahoma Territory. After the Civil War. The Europeans poured into this country, and in 24 hours, y'all know what I'm talking about, for 24 hours, that's one day. In one day, Europeans picked up over 1 million to 2 million acres of free land. They didn't pay for the land, they got it free. They got free land. Now, what you should be thinking is, now, what if black folk had not been the exception, if black folk had not been the exception going back to drafting the Constitution, if black folk had been able to be able to vote and not the exception, would the United States Constitution look the way it looks now if black folk had had a chance to have a right to Constitution? Would they, if I were to go out west and I see all these, I got whites that own 50,000, 40,000 acres of land for ranches and farms in the Midwest and in the Southwest and all across the country. If black folk had been able to gather free land, look what you would have had. Would the country still look the same if black folk had been given thousands and thousands of free land and on that land have all the timber, the gold, the silver, the chrome, the bauxite, the magnesium? What would black folk have done there? What would the country look like as the country began to develop? Because see, black folk were the exception. You were different from everybody. You were being treated differently. But yet you keep talking about social integration. How in the world can you be different at the same time you keep trying to integrate? Keep saying, I want to be like everybody else. How are you going to be like everybody else when you never treated like everybody else? You never got the benefits that everybody else got. You've never been like everybody else. You were the people. Black people were the people that went across the country. And with their labor, they built their houses, the buildings. They built Washington, D.C., the Capitol, the White House. They built most of the schools, big old schools, Harvard University and all the other big schools, and Notre Dame. They built the schools. Black folk took their sweat out of their body and built the canals and the roads. But the Asians didn't do it. The Arabs didn't do it. The Hispanics didn't do it. The Cubans didn't do it. You did it. But you don't get any credit because you fail to claim your exceptionality, that you're different. And if you're different, don't put me in that category. But you see, we allow people to put us in these categories, and therefore they say, well, you see, black folk are no different than anybody else. Yes, you are different. Yes. You've always been different. You've been different ever since the country was discovered. But you've never had the chance or never took the chance to say that is inappropriate behavior on our part. They keep going around pretending we're no different than anyone else. You are different. And I hear people say, well, you know, don't tell people you're better than anybody. I am better than a lot of people. I don't mind telling you. My mother never told me where I said, go forward and tell you. Yes, I am. I'm better than a hell of a lot of damn people. And you started saying, yeah, we're better. We built all this stuff. And the greatest insult to your exceptionality is for you to go into a school system or into a public arena and allow people to keep using this thing about all people have contributed equally to the development of this country. That's a lie. That is a lie. All people did not contribute to the development of this country. You contributed. You put in the sweat. And I want black folk to understand this day and as long as you live, you are not guests in America. You're not guests in America. You walk on sacred ground, paid for by the blood, sweat, and tears, and the suffering and sacrifice.
Come on, Dr. Anderson.
Of millions of black cooks, butlers, waiters, and janitors, dishwashers. Why in the world let somebody keep putting you in a bag by what you're just like everybody else? That adds insult to injury. You were injured when they did it to you, and now you're going to let them insult you by putting you in the bag, make you pretend you're equal to everybody else. They're not equal to you. They're not equal. In this country, you are not the guest. It's the immigrants that came here are the guests. They are the guests. And in a home, the owner has got a priority over the guest. You are the natives in this country. You are the natives on this earth. And that's what you should be standing up for. You got to remember when I leave here that 98% of all the black people in America right now are the direct descendants of slaves. Now what does that mean for you in your exceptionality? And you begin to proclaim your exceptionality. You proclaim at every place you go that we are an exception. You proclaim, I want to see it on t-shirts, sweaters, on signs and bulletin boards, that we are an exception. We are an exception. We're different from everybody else. If 98% of you are the direct descendants of slaves, that means you were here before 98% of all the rest arrived.
And because his time is short, and we don't want to take too much time, we want to bring him up. So give it up, everybody, for Howard Finkelstein.
Now, what does all this mean? Well, it plays out even more, and that's why this program is so important, so you can see a global view. Although the topic that we are discussing is one that should have been put to bed decades and decades and decades ago.
The United States Supreme Court said this, that a black man has no rights, that a white man is bound to respect. Now, notice very clearly again, did you all hear anything about Indians, Asian, Hispanic, that they don't have any rights? It was very specific to whom?
Black people.
Who?
Black people.
That you all don't have any rights. They didn't include all these groups that they put you into, the minorities, the poor folk, and people of color. The court did not say people of color didn't have any rights. It didn't say Asians and Arabs didn't have any rights. It didn't say women and gays didn't have any rights. It says black people. And so that was a Dred Scott decision in 1857. Now,
What has traditionally been the belief that the laws apply to everybody equally is just not something that has ever happened yet in this country. I think that what Hope has done here is really important. I want to kind of direct you just right here to where we live, to our community, to our county.
I don't want to spend too long. How long do I have, Hope? Okay. Well, here's a prime example of why that matters. A few weeks ago, I'm not sure how many of you pay attention to the news. We had one of the school commissioners. She was found guilty by a jury. I forget her names. Anyways, she was found, I think it's Stephanie Kraft, if I'm not mistaken, Kraft. She was found, listen to this, she was found guilty by a jury. She went to trial, she was found guilty. The judge over that case is a judge named Matthew Destry, and 4th District Court of Appeal. And you will find that he is one of the most reversed judges in Broward County, number one. What you'll also find if you talk to criminal defense attorneys is that he is one of the harshest sentencers in Broward County. Harshest sentencers in Broward County. Stephanie Kraft was found guilty by a jury of her peers. He gave her a withhold of adjudication, which means she's not a convicted felon, and probation.
There are still two standards of justice, two systems of justice.
Those breaks. We don't get the benefit of the doubt. When it's your son and your daughter, they're going up the road, period. We had another case in front of Judge, what's her name, Imperato. That was the judge that was arrested for DUI in Palm Beach, right? There was a case maybe about in 2009 or 2011 where a black man was stopped by the police. He was pulled out of, there was some confrontation, he was pulled out of his car, there was, again, there was some sort of physical altercation, the police charged him with a whole bunch of offenses. So the guy was arrested, he was brought to jail, he had to bond out, he had to get himself an attorney, prepare for trial, so on and so forth. When he's going to trial, all of a sudden, the dash cam video pops up. And the dash cam video shows something completely different than what the police officer said. It shows the police officer beating his butt. So they drop the case against him, they charge the police officer, and they go to trial. He's found guilty. I could say a lot about the prosecution, but I won't. But he's found guilty not of the battery, but he's found guilty of falsification of records, which is still a felony. So Judge Imperato, former state trooper, former prosecutor, gives the police officer a withhold of adjudication, which he's not a convicted felon, and 1 year of administrative probation, which means he didn't even have to go in. He could just write a letter. Again, these things happen to us, and they continue to happen to us because we refuse to exercise our rights to vote.
These issues are huge and they're deep. Right here in Broward County, for decades, I have been screaming, as Hope talks about, about the fact that if you're black and you're driving down a street in Broward County, the chance of you being stopped is so much greater than if you are white. The problem is everybody who was black knew that. Everybody who's been a public defender knew that, but we couldn't prove it.
Social integration. Now, keep in mind now, when you start talking about going after your exceptionality and getting people to understand what racism is, don't be angry and make it, because we're not going after, I don't want you out fighting, cursing, shooting, cutting anybody. They whipped us and took advantage of us, that's gone. I don't want you to hate anybody. We're going to learn how to think and play the same game.
Yeah.
I told the women that came to see me, why don't you go to see the urban NAACP?
Come on, Dr. Anderson.
They said they won't help us. Nobody's going to help them. Nobody's going to help them. Why? Because even though black folk, again, are exceptions, all those immigrants came into the country, they get special benefits. They got programs for them that are specifically designed. But never in the history of this nation has there been one single solitary piece of legislation that's ever stayed in effect that was specifically designed to help black people. Never. But black folk don't demand it. They demand stuff for minorities and poor folk. When I was with President Carter.
So the bottom line in Fort Lauderdale is, if you're black, you'd better not walk, you'd better not bike, and you'd better not drive, or you're going to be stopped. That, and although it sounds funny when I say it, when you really look at what happens, it's not funny at all.
No, it's not.
Because what happens then, and this is why it has, you know, you're going to hear from speakers about economic disparity. One of the main reasons for young black people not having a fair shot is they can't get out of the neighborhood without a rap sheet. Why? Not because they're doing anything different than white kids. Here's the difference. My kids are now 27 and 25, and when they were a little bit younger, they were like every other kid that age. They were drinking their tequila, smoking their marijuana, walking around with their bongs. The difference was no cop would ever break my door down, knock my wife on her ass, run into my kid's room, and search through their drawers. That happens every hour of every night in certain neighborhoods.
You understand how the grand jury works. There's no two sides to it. There's only one side to it. So every 4 years, we elect this county prosecutor. I looked at the Supervisor of Elections website, and there are more black registered voters in Broward County than there are total number of Republicans. Did you guys know that? There are more black registered voters in Broward County than there are registered Republicans. Right? And here's the stunning statistic. In Broward County, we make up, I like to use round numbers. It says we make up 28% of the population. I can say we make up 30% of the population. We make up 30% of the population. We have 90 judges in Broward County. 9-0, right? 9-0. So 30% of 90 is what? 27? Yeah? So we should have, if you just did the numbers, 27 black judges, right? We have a grand total of 6. We have a grand total of 6 black judges.
You would think that we could go to court, and once we put this out there, we're going to get relief because everybody can see that this is wrong. Well, we have 100 judges in Broward County. 6 are black. 6. You may not know this, or you might know it. We live in a majority-minority community, which means when you add up all of the minority groups, they constitute more than 50% of our community. Yet only 6 judges are black. So they come into that courtroom with a predisposition not to hear and not to see. Not because their hearts are bad, but as the speaker in the video said, because their mind ain't right. And the way the prejudice plays, and that's why ending racism is not only an imperative for people of color, but it's going to free white people as well, because they are inextricably intertwined. But as it plays out in court, and I've watched this for the last 10 years, when I started 40 years ago, they used the N-word in court. They used it in court. I heard judge after judge say, how can this be murder? You just killed a black guy. Right here in the most liberal county in America. That's what was going on. Well, today's racism is different. Today's racism isn't one of a dark heart. It's one of a messed up mind. And here's how it works. When I have a client and he might be 18 years of age and he might be a white kid. Well, he walks into that courtroom and he's kind of dressed like the judge's kid, kind of walks like the judge's kid, kind of has the same tone and intonation. And what the judge feels on a visceral level is, hey, he's kind of like my kid. I'm going to give him a break. You know, he messed up. Now my client, the next client, young black kid, kind of walks in. Maybe his pants are riding a little low. Maybe he's got a little pimp roll going on. His tone, his attitude is a little different, culturally different. The judge who's white, who has nobody of color in their life, looks down and doesn't say that's a bad black person. What they feel is, this kid's attitude's not right. I'm not going to give him a chance. And that's the difference. It's that simple. And when you confront a judge with that, they can't see it, they can't feel it, because in their mind, they're the judge and they know this kid's got a bad attitude. And what they don't get is that in different cultures, there are different ways, and there are different mannerisms, and there's different ways in which people walk and talk and shake hands and express themselves. And as long as our community stays separated, we live separately, we worship separately, this is going to continue to be a problem.